And you're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Coming up, Meng Wanzhou returned home safe and sound after the U.S. dropped the extradition request. Some suggest this could be the starting point of a shift of directions in China-U.S. relations. Is that too optimistic assessment? More debate about that after this break. Welcome back. This is World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The return of Huawei's chief financial officer Meng Wanzhou to China speaks volumes of the nation's independent foreign policy. Chinese State Councilor Foreign Minister Wang ruled out bowing to hegemonic behaviors, far from afraid of any coercion. While Meng's return may be seen as a positive step in relations between China and the United States, if not a breakthrough, 8 months into the Biden presidency, is it a turning point in the U.S.-China relations, or is it too much to interpret? Besides climate action, could it lend momentum to positive bilateral interactions in the future? Let's loop in our panelists. For more on China-U.S. ties with the latest development, I'm joined by Wu Xinbo, Director of the Center for American Studies in Shanghai, in Washington, D.C., Surab Gupta, Head of the Trade and Tech Program at Institute for China-American Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Gupta, from your perspective, what does Meng Wanzhou's story, the current realities, mean to China-U.S. relations?
In my view, I think it's a good story, and frankly, it means that the Biden administration, as it has been trying to do, is finding avenues to bring the relationship back on a somewhat more normal track. I think the two countries are still far apart, but nevertheless, I can see an imperceptible but incremental movement towards a more coexistent relationship, and this is, in a small way, a testimony to that.
Incremental steps. Professor Wu, agree?
Certainly, that's a very important first step in a long way to improve China-U.S. relations. To some extent, it suggests that the Biden administration may be thinking seriously about getting rid of some of the negative legacy left by the Trump administration on China-U.S. relations. So this is a good start. It also helps improve the overall atmosphere in U.S.-China relations. As we know now, the big problem, the big challenge confronting U.S.-China relations now is the huge trust deficit. Getting Meng Wanzhou back to China, I think the two sides take a very important step in improving mutual trust.
Okay.
And if we can move down the road continuously, we can expect some remarkable improvement of this relationship.
Okay. Both of you, of course, are trying to be constructive in terms of a better relationship between China and the United States over the years, but the atmosphere in Washington is not necessarily that, shall I say, satisfying in that direction. Mr. Gupta, now, how much does politics matter in this sense? Or is it all about politics, really?
I think politics matters to a very significant element. Mr. Trump had left a really poison chalice for Mr. Biden to handle. And I would say Secretary of State Anthony Blinken has mainly been playing politics, frankly, with regard to the U.S.-China, managing the politics of the relationship while hoping that one rung below him, that at that level, at the deputy, at the Wendy Sherman level, that certain confidence could be built in the relationship.
One might take small clues from different directions on different issues. But Professor Wu, the always important question is the nature of this relationship between China and the United States. Now, earlier we already talked about that, right? China wants to set the tone for a relationship from day one, hopefully, with the help from the other side. But the U.S. is trying to go as it, play as it goes, it seems, with its own domestic politics mainly. So, Professor Wu, how do you see these two approaches will be able to meet in the middle way?
There is quite a big difference between the Chinese and the U.S. approach to this relationship. From the Chinese side, we want to define this relationship as mainly cooperative, while competition exists, but we want to make sure that's manageable and is benign competition, and also confrontation should be avoided. While on the U.S. side, they put competition out in the front as the dominant nature of this relationship, and also confrontation and to a lesser extent cooperation are also part of this relationship. So as you can tell, on the Chinese side, we have a more constructive definition of this relationship as cooperation-driven, while the U.S. one is more competition-driven. However, if each side look at the cooperation side dimension, we do have a lot of opportunities to cooperate. What's happening now, in my observation, with Biden's approach to this relationship, is that they gradually realize that while they continue to emphasize competition with China, but there is a growing demand for cooperation with China in a wide range of areas. So that explains why Biden wants to take a step forward in solving the Meng Wanzhou cases. And this very realistic and pragmatic approach to this relationship, I hope they will continue along the line down the road.
Another thing is about the technology area. As we know, the U.S. Already made it very clear this is going to be fierce competition, and there has to be camps being built against China from acquiring certain technologies and getting hold of it, quote unquote. So, Mr. Gupta, you've been researching about trade and tech programs. Tell me more about what Meng Wanzhou's case now mean for both the directions and the nature of discussions in the U.S. about this.
I'm afraid I don't think that will change too much, frankly, in terms of the direction on trade and tech, where the Biden administration will go. Let me make this point. The Trump administration's approach was, it's been talked, the jargon's been talked in terms of a very big garden with very high walls, basically to block China and squeeze China and thwart China's technological rise by blocking it from these technologies. So it would be a small garden. The walls would remain high. But that's just a matter of nuance. And the impression one gets is that more or less the Biden team is going on the lines of the Trump team, just trying to do it in a palatable way where you can bring allies together so that it doesn't become unilateral, because that doing it unilaterally becomes self-damaging to oneself.
Right.
But I also say with regard to the Meng Wanzhou case, I think the case that the Justice Department was pushing was just getting weaker and weaker and weaker. It had become a hot potato in a way, because the point had come where she was going to be perhaps soon extradited. And before it came to that, where she needed to be extradited, but the case was so weak and would just blow up things in any ways without much of a benefit. And I think that's why they got pragmatic in trying to work this deal through. So I don't see so much in news in terms of trade and technology controls coming out of this release.
Professor Wu, that's rather a realistic assessment done by Mr. Gupta?
Yes, I agree with him almost everything he said. After all, the Biden administration put technology as the core of U.S. competition with China. Even though there may be some tactical adjustments in the scope, in the type of the technology transferable to China, but overall, the U.S. is determined to maintain its superiority in this regard. And we are also trying to build this kind of coalition with its allies and friends to make sure that the U.S. wins the competition with China in technology area, even though Meng Wanzhou has returned to China safe and sound. But I guess the U.S. crackdown on Huawei will continue, and even in a more fierce way. So the implication for China is that you have no choice but to pursue the indigenous innovation and to drop the illusion about the U.S. supply of technology. And also, finally, I think China should feel confident about this competition. After all, in 10 years' time, what will be the largest economy in the world? What will be the largest market in the world? So what's the value of technology if you cannot be sold on the market? So I think that's a major trumpet that China holds in the competition with the United States.
Moving on to another direction and the final direction of questions, we witnessed the two presidents had a fascinating, apparently, according to the press release, and in-depth discussion on the phone a few weeks ago. Professor Wu, what can we expect?
I think the recent phone call by President Biden to President Xi is important. It should help Biden get a better understanding of the Chinese position on relations with the United States. It should also help get him a better sense about how to improve these relations if he wishes to pursue his agenda in relations with China. So as we can say, Meng Wanzhou's returning to China is the very first step, but a very important first step. And down the road, we should expect to see the commercial team of the two sides will meet very soon, and they will discuss how to trying to bring the bilateral economic and trade relations back to normal. After all, trade and economic relations are really the core of this relationship. They are complementary by nature, and both sides want to enhance this relationship. As I just read from the media, U.S. Secretary of Commerce just said that she wanted to lead a delegation of U.S. CEOs to China to enhance this relationship. I think that's contrasted with the Trump administration, which had worked very hard to promote decoupling of the two economies. But now in Biden administration, even though they are still trying to promote decoupling in technology, in value chain in some areas. But on the other hand, they realize that growing trade between two countries are essential to both sides. In addition to trade and economic relations, we can also enhance our dialogue and coordination on a wide range of other issues like climate change, Afghanistan, Iran, Korean Peninsula, and you name it. So if the Biden administration really adopt a more cooperation-oriented approach to this relationship, and there will be a much bright prospect for this relationship down the road.
Mr. Gupta, your thoughts?
Oh, I totally agree. I mean, there are ample areas to cooperate out here. I think of the Chinese end, frankly, there's a little bit of, we know there's mistrust in the relationship. And the problem at this point of time is that the Chinese side feels that maybe the US wants to use China in a big way this year for the next 2 or 3 months because there's this huge climate change summit coming up. And Mr. Biden had already said that, yes, we need to work with China on that. But then that once that summit is over, that Mr. Biden will again go back to his antagonistic ways vis-a-vis China, because on the other areas, he's not kind of framed out where he will cooperate with China. And I understand that sense of relative mistrust then at the Chinese end as to, is Mr. Biden just trying to play us for the next couple of months, and we'll see from that. But I think there's ample avenues of cooperation, and I think it's been a little disturbing that the U.S. side has been so slow in doing its China trade policy review and coming to a decision on that, because at this point of time, the decision on whether to remove some of the tariffs, remove all the tariffs, what to do about the phase one agreement on market commitments ends up this year, what to do about it going forward next year, when do we begin a phase two negotiation on the structural issues, all these are bubbling. And I'm hoping that by the time Mr. Biden goes to Asia, if he does go to Asia for the ASEAN-wide summits, that on November 13th, which is the date of the ASEAN Business Summit, APEC Business Summit, he will have his views on Asia Pacific as well as China liberalization set in stone, and that can be a basis for further engagement.
Surabh Gupta, Wu Xinbo, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us.